And as that sets in, milder weather is on the way, especially in the north. It also turns more damp overnight across western Scotland, particularly over the hills, and some damp weather into the west of Northern Ireland. Otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK, but some breaks in the cloud. The cloud fairly thin across southern parts of the UK, so still a frosty start for some in the south as we begin Friday. A bright start, though. A lot of high cloud in the sky, I think, but actually plenty of brighter spells and dry weather coming through at times. Some drizzly stuff coming into West Wales by the end of the afternoon, as well as northern England, but the most persistent rain will affect western Scotland, particularly over higher ground. And with the winds now coming from the southwest, it's a milder afternoon, particularly in the north. 11 to 12 Celsius for eastern Scotland, 8 or 9 for southeast England, where, well, the brightest skies will remain. And similar weather through the weekend. We're going to see cloudier conditions towards the northwest with some drizzle in places, brighter and drier towards the southeast, and milder for all of us.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today on GB News TV and DAB Radio. Did you see the adoration of President Zelensky amongst MPs yesterday? The former actor certainly had your MPs eating out of his hands. And now Rishi Sunak says that nothing is off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Boris Johnson is going even further, saying that we should send our jets now. Is that what you want your tax money spent upon? Let me know. And on a lighter note this morning, we're going to be heading down to Cornwall, where William and Kate, the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, are making their first official visit there since receiving those new titles. I've got Mike Parry and Joanna Williams here to discuss the day's biggest stories until 12 o'clock, including Home Secretary Suella Braverman laying into the government's anti-terror prevent programme, saying that it needs to tackle security and stop being so preoccupied with political correctness. We've got a lot to get through. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Around 70 members of UK International Search and Rescue, including firefighters and medics, have arrived in Turkey. The team of volunteers will assess the destroyed area before sending information back to the command and control team. Nearly 16,000 people are now known to have died after Monday's devastating earthquakes in the south of the country and northern Syria. Dozens of British charities will launch an appeal later to raise funds for those affected. The Disasters Emergency Committee is coordinating a rapid response by 14 charities, including the British Red Cross and Oxfam. The government says it'll match any donations made by the public. Volodymyr Zelensky is joining an EU summit in Brussels today to lobby leaders to provide more weapons to Ukraine in the fight against Russia. He travelled with French President Emmanuel Macron after a brief stop in Paris, one that followed his surprise visit to the UK. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak said nothing's off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. As Zelensky continues his whirlwind tour of his European backers, he's also looking to quick-start talks on becoming a member of the bloc. Back here, strike action by firefighters has been put on hold while union members consider an increased pay offer. Members of the Fire Brigades Union held last-minute talks with bosses yesterday after rejecting an offer of a 5% increase. The union says it's considering a revised 7% pay rise backdated to July last year and another 5% from this July. They'll now ballot members on the proposal. Meanwhile, university staff and physiotherapists are striking today in the latest wave of industrial action to sweep the country. Around 70,000 university and college union members are walking off the job across 150 universities. Meanwhile, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy is striking at 33 trusts in England. It's accused the government of being intransigent in refusing to discuss pay for the current financial year. Consumer analyst Martin Lewis has called for the planned rise in the energy price cap this April to be scrapped. He's written to the Chancellor saying it's likely to be lower than the energy price guarantee by July, meaning the customer will pay less. The letter says wholesale prices have come down substantially, meaning it's no longer necessary to increase the cap. He's being supported by charities including Citizens Advice and National Energy Action. An underwater search expert says the case of missing mother of two, Nicola Bulley, is a complete mystery. That's after his team were unable to find her. Peter Faulding was called in to help find the dog walker who went missing almost 2 weeks ago. Lancashire Police says it still believes Nicola Bulley fell into the River Wire. Superintendent Sally Riley has described the search as unprecedented, with 40 detectives following 500 lines of inquiry. The Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting Cornwall today. It's their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate will visit the harbour town of Falmouth to learn about its naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. It's Prince William's second official visit to the area after he toured Newquay last November. The Business and Trade Secretary is on her way to Mexico. She's looking to form new trading arrangements post-Brexit. Kemi Badenoch will hold talks with her counterparts on the UK becoming part of a Trans-Pacific partnership involving 11 countries, including Australia, Canada, Chile and Japan. On her 2-day visit to Mexico City, she'll also look to update Britain's 20-year-old free trade agreement with the country to involve digital services and technology. The new Deputy Conservative Party chairman has said he would support the return of the death penalty in the UK. In an interview with The Spectator, Lee Anderson said nobody has ever committed a crime after being executed. The former Labour councillor who converted to the Tories was handed his new role on Tuesday amid a cabinet reshuffle. The death penalty for murder in the UK was scrapped in 1969. It was completely abolished for all crimes in 1998. And the number of people in England waiting for care has risen slightly, but remains below the recent record high, according to new figures. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start routine hospital treatment in December. That's up from the previous month, but less than the 7.21 million in October. That was the highest number since records began. It's also found that around 1,200 people have been waiting more than 2 years to start treatment at the end of last year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up on the show today between now and midday. President Putin has given a warning of military political consequences if the UK gives fighter jets to Ukraine. It comes as President Zelensky made a surprise visit to the UK yesterday to ask Western allies for aircraft and supplies. Rishi Sunak has said nothing is off the table. We're going to be discussing that in just a moment. Also this morning, the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall will make their first joint official visit to the county since taking on their new roles. Our royal reporter is there in Cornwall, keeping an eye out for William and Kate. We'll cross over to him very shortly. And the author, Joanna Williams, and journalist Mike Parry will join me throughout the show to discuss some of the other big stories of the day, including our anti-terror programme Prevent, which does not seem to be working. Home Secretary Suella Braverman said we need to better understand the threats we face and the ideology underpinning them. And the system, she says, needs major reform. You, of course, are my third panellist this morning. I'd love to hear from you. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. So, Volodymyr Zelensky is continuing his European tour today after urging the UK to supply Ukraine with fighter jets during his surprise visit yesterday. During a landmark address to Parliament, he thanked Britain for providing military and economic support throughout the war. France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz have reiterated their belief that Russia must not win the war too. So it feels like we're at a bit of a turning point, doesn't it? I'm joined now by Robert Clark, Director of Defence and Security at think tank Civitas. Good morning, Robert. What would the significance be, do you think, if we do give him the jets that he wants?
I mean, there's three real significant moments that would cause. The first is a psychological moment where, obviously, it would put Russia on the back foot militarily. UK jets, Western jets more broadly, are far more capable than the Russians are using in Ukraine. Second is the military capability that will then enact on the battlefield, and it'll help, crucially, that'll help Ukraine maintain sort of air superiority, which they need now that we've given the tanks, and they're going to increase their operations come the end of this month. And then the third is really symbolically as well, and the idea of standing behind Zelensky and the Ukrainian regime politically. We've talked a good talk for the last year. We've done even better with the military support we've given. But there's going to be a fine line to tread, I think, with regards to the UK sending jets themselves.
I mean, we haven't just talked a good talk. We've given him several billion pounds so far. And I get the sense, hosting this show and hearing from our viewers and our listeners, that the public appetite is waning in terms of the endless, apparently, there is no out-ramp. What is our exit route to this war? We keep talking about giving more money, giving more supplies. nobody doubts the hardship that the Ukrainian people have been through and continue to go through. That's. I think we have to distinguish those two issues to some extent. But where does this go now? We've got Putin's statements this morning saying that he will retaliate in the harshest possible way if we send over jets. The British people, I don't think we have the stomach right now for a nuclear war.
Nobody has the stomach for a nuclear war. When we look at Putin's rhetoric, look, he said the same from even before day one. We've been training the Ukrainians since 2015, and we've been supplying them with missiles for about the last 4 or 5 years. Putin's known this, and every time there seems to be an increase in particularly British military help and support, the rhetoric gets ratcheted up. And it's, without sounding blasé, it is bluster, it's a game of brinkmanship, and it's, it goes to Putin's sort of diplomacy of trying to act tough, but in reality, his bark is far worse than his bites.
How do we know that? If reports are true that he is terminally ill, which we've heard speculation about for a long time, why not go out in a bang, to use a terribly inappropriate phrase? It's a worrying situation for Brits.
No, absolutely, and it is a risk, and it's a calculated risk that the government will be deciding and taking upon. But if we look at the recent round of British military tanks that we sent only 3 weeks ago, or we announced 3 weeks ago, Putin said the exact same. He said there would be reprisals. He said, Ukraine's allies would be targeted, and so far, nothing. We do obviously have to take those threats into consideration and take them seriously, especially when we consider, for example, the Salisbury attack in 2018, where Russia did use, obviously, chemical nerve agents against British targets. So the threat is real. However, like I say, as part of a greater coalition, as part of Britain aren't just on their own. It is with the United States, it's with the majority of Europe and the international community writ large.
We're looking at live pictures here of Zelensky talking in Brussels at the moment. He's a very charismatic man. Obviously, he's a former Hollywood actor. He has all the skills to win over a room, doesn't he? Do you think that... Is there a sense now in which it is impossible for any MPs to say, maybe we need to look at this in a bigger picture now? It's like we've been swept along with a wave of enthusiasm for supporting this. It feels like at all costs.
I mean, to be honest, it's almost... The argument at all costs is a persuasive one. To go back to your original, your comment a moment ago about MPs and the ability to sort of hold them slightly to check a bit. There's a great deal of scrutiny and a great deal of accountability in Parliament regarding the support for Ukraine. For example, the £2.3 billion that was spent last year on military aid, half of that came from the Ministry of Defence, the other half from the Treasury. Now, that was all voted upon by MPs, and we must remember MPs are there on our behalf. There's a general election coming next year. If the public do feel that we're supporting Ukraine too much, particularly by the end of this year, as we go into another particularly hard winter, I suspect, then obviously the people will vote with their feet. But we have to look at the wider picture. The Labour government, the Labour shadow government are saying the exact same. John Healey, the Shadow Defence Secretary, and Keir Starmer are both saying they'd support Ukraine just as much. This isn't going away anytime soon, but the hope is that with enough Western support, particularly towards the end of this year, like I say, what will be another harsh winter, we can hopefully start to alleviate the problems on the battlefield, and then they'll obviously start to alleviate the problems at home, inflation, rising costs, etc.
Yeah. If we do give them the jets that they want, how quickly do you think, Robert, as an expert, what difference would that make in the timescale of bringing this to an end, which is what everybody wants?
Oh, absolutely. That is what it's all about at the end of the day. The question of jets is incredibly difficult for several reasons. The training of the Ukrainian pilots is happening now in the UK. We're the only country in the world doing so initially. Now, that's on simulators and sort of replicated training. That can be replicated into real-time aircraft. But the ability to then send fifth generation, next generation fighter aircraft, which is what we're talking about, to Ukraine for the pilots. I don't think it's that realistic to happen from the UK. If anything, it's going to happen from the Eastern European and Northern European countries like particularly Sweden with their Gripen aircraft. Now, the ability to get those into service quite quickly, you're looking at realistically a 3 to 6 month time frame at least. So we're looking at a second or third tranche for the offensive, so sort of summer into autumn. But crucially, like I keep maintaining, to break hopefully what would be another winter stalemate and try to bring this war to a close but before that would happen. But I have to stress, I can't see that happening, to be perfectly honest, this year. It has only been 1 year, and I stress that in relation to wider conflicts and wars more broadly, 1 year isn't a long time. So we're looking at least the rest of this year, try to break the stalemate over next winter. And then really next year, potentially, what we're going to see is what I say is the vital ground, which is going to be Crimea. It's all going to come down to Crimea and how that gets settled, either militarily or politically.
What do you mean? Explain that to us in a little bit more detail.
So Russia have maintained from the beginning that Crimea is Russian territory.
Yeah.
It was gifted to Ukraine, if you like, under the Soviet Union in 1957. So for the last 70-odd years, it's been Ukrainian territory. Now, both countries hold Crimea incredibly importantly, sort of ideologically and nationally, their national identity. And obviously Russia invaded it back in 2014.
Yeah.
So it will come to head in Crimea. It's one of the land bridges with Russia. There's a lot of Russian military equipment on Crimea. Their Black Fleet is based there. But the Ukrainian government and Volodymyr Zelensky in particular have highlighted several times that Crimea remains an absolute intrinsic part of retaking back Ukrainian ground.
Obviously, this whole thing, it's really important, I think, to go back, isn't it, Robert, to work out where this all started. And I think there's often this misconception that Ukraine was an entirely peaceful country from east to west. Everyone was sleeping soundly in their beds, and so suddenly Putin started bombing them. It wasn't like that, was it? And we have to remember that the Donbass region in the east was predominantly Russian populous, with predominant Russian-speaking people. And Putin's excuse, if you like, for the first invasion was because he was defending the people of that area from the Nazi battalions, Ukrainian Nazi battalions. Is that relevant now? Does any of that matter at this stage?
I think the relevancy is in the accuracy of the narrative, to be honest, because it helps to understand where it might go in the future. So, for example, the idea of Nazi battalions, there's been far-right, obviously, sympathies in the Azov battalion, but the Azov battalion itself were crucial in the fighting of Mariupol, so they have a crucial role to play within the Ukrainian armed forces. Regarding the idea of Nazification more broadly in the Ukrainian armed forces, it's relatively false and inaccurate. Russia used that to portray and obviously bring up the idea of, to stir the idea of World War II and the idea of sort of national identity in that regard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the origins itself are incredibly complicated. Yeah. We can really look to 2013 and 2014 when the Ukrainian government were trying to turn more towards the EU for trade and military support. And obviously Putin didn't like that. He still regarded Ukraine through the prism of the Soviet Union, a very sort of myopic and sort of parochial view of sort of regional affairs. And he sought to obviously to take back Ukraine back within a broader sort of greater Russia. So it's absolutely expansionist, it's absolutely revisionist, and it's fundamentally it's the same ideology which underpins Chinese motives to ultimately and almost definitely will try to invade Taiwan. And these are completely anathema to the liberal order, which the UK have sought to sort of defend for the last sort of 70, 80 years.
OK, thank you, Robert. Really interesting. Robert Clark there. OK, so the Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting Cornwall today. Lucky them. It's their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate will visit the harbour town of Falmouth to learn more about the country's naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. Cameron Walker is the GB News royal reporter who joins us now from Cornwall. Oh, good morning, Cameron. Lucky you. What a lovely place in the country to be on a gorgeous winter morning. What have you got planned for today? What are the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall likely to be doing?
Certainly is, Bev. Welcome to sunny Cornwall here on a beautiful coastline. So the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, in other words, the Prince and Princess of Wales, are here for their first official trip with their new titles. They are going to be learning about Cornwall's maritime heritage, as well as visiting members of the local community in this harbour town here called Falmouth. Now, with the new titles of the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, which was previously held by the now King for more than 70 years when he was holding it, is the Duchy of Cornwall. So what is the Duchy of Cornwall? Well, that is a big portfolio of lands and property, 53,000 hectares, which is a lot bigger than my back garden, Bev, let me tell you, which is worth roughly £1 billion. Now, the profits of that, which stretches a lot of land over south-west of England, actually, but mainly in Cornwall, the profits of that, which is roughly £22 million last year's figures, provides an income for the Prince of Wales and his immediate family. So that's Princess Catherine and his 3 children, the Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. It's for public and private functions, that money. Now, Prince William does not actually need to pay income tax on it. However, he does choose to do so, but it's done on a voluntary basis rather than by law. But clearly £22 million is a lot of money, so it puts him in a very privileged position. However, if you remember back in 2021, there were several news reports that when Prince William inherits the Duchy of Cornwall from his father, he would try and convert some of that land to house the homeless. Now, Kensington Palace has not confirmed anything yet. However, they have told me that homelessness is very much going to be a big focus for the Prince of Wales, Duke of Cornwall, this year. Of course, he's been patron of Centrepoint, which is a charity that helps young people experiencing homelessness. He's been doing that since 2005, so it's a cause really close to his heart. So, Bev, if I were you, I'd watch this space.
Have a lovely day down there, Cameron. I'm incredibly jealous. It's beautiful down there this morning. Right, keep watching. We will bring you some of that footage when it emerges now after the break. The government's anti-terror prevent programme needs major reform and must focus not on security and not political correctness. That's coming from our Home Secretary, Stella Braverman. We're going to talk about that with Mike Parry and Joanna Williams in just a few moments.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. It's 10:23. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. You've been getting in touch. Thank you. We've been talking about our funding of the Ukrainian war. I'm going to be discussing it with my guest in just a moment as well. And Lee has said Britain is supposed to be helping Ukraine with peripheral support. Fighter jets are the next step into the vortex of war. All this for American internal political consumption. It is wrong. And Tom said, if it was as bad as suggested, why hasn't NATO stepped in? Lots of you getting in touch about that. Thank you. Keep your messages coming. Right, my guests are here. I'm so happy to have Joanna Williams with me, writer of Amazing Substack, which inspires my reading choices quite regularly. And Mike Parry, with your lovely haircut, Mike.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, I've had it cut a bit too short.
No, you look great.
So the makeup lady here has already spent 2 cans of spray getting it to sit down.
What an admission. You look very smart. Right, guys, we're going to start off talking about this Prevent programme. So, obviously, this was put into practice in order to root out terrorist activity before it happens in the UK. It was hailed as going to be, you know, finding all of those that might be radicalised before they actually cause any sort of violence against us. It's been under various kind of criticisms over the years, and Suella Braverman ordered a report into this. Priti Patel, as was at the time in 2019, and William Shawcross, the ex-Charity Commission chairman, has carried out that report. And there's some pretty damning conclusions in it, Joanna, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, his criticisms are that over recent years it's become more focused upon right-wing terrorism rather than Islamic extremism. And if you actually look just numerically, more people have been referred for being a right-wing terrorist than for being an Islamic extremist. And that's just completely out of kilter with the reality of the threat that we face in this country. I mean, there have been far more and far more severe Islamic extremist attacks, Islamic terrorist attacks, than there have right-wing terrorist attacks. So that's the first thing. I mean, the second thing is just that the standard to be referred is that much lower. So to be an Islamic extremist, you have to be like kind of practically building a bomb in your bedroom to be referred to this programme, whereas to be a right-wing, referred for a right-wing cause, it could be just that you've expressed an opinion that the teacher at your school doesn't agree with and considers to be right-wing. That's really shocking.
Do we know why that's happening, Mike?
I tell you what I'm so pleased about on this. Normally, these reports come out and they go onto a top shelf and nothing's ever done about them. But Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, has responded immediately to the report to stimulate our interest in it. And the one paragraph I've picked out this morning from her response to it is this: Islamist terrorism, to endorse everything my colleague has just said, Islamist terrorism remains the UK's primary and deadliest terrorist threat. Yet the independent review found that the Islamist threat is severely underrepresented in Prevent. Shawcross, the Shawcross report, identified an institutional hesitancy to tackle Islamist ideology. That just about sums it up, doesn't it? And isn't it great that the Home Secretary is taking the lead rather than saying, right, you know, I'll give this to, you know, the Home Office and we'll have a look. No, she's right from the start. She said, no. She says right at the start of her response this morning, the terrorist threat facing the UK continues to endure. And then she lists Manchester, London Bridge and Borough Market, Fishmongers Hall, the murder of Sir David Amess. She's making it absolutely clear, so we can all focus in our heads, all these things are happening and we know who's committing them. So don't start bringing out other tributaries in this investigation to try and water things down.
No, I think that's important. But I think the question you asked, Bev, about why is this happening? Why are more people being reported for right-wing extremism? I think it's a really, really important question. And to me, it seems that the people who are doing the referring, so that's police officers, teachers, social workers, they tend to see people who get into Islamic extremism as victims, as being mentally ill almost, or being vulnerable. And so kind of having been lured into this kind of accidentally and that they need looking after. And for me, the best example of that is the way that we see Shamima Begum being treated as a celebrity. You know, she's constantly in the news now, on the front page of glossy Sunday magazine supplements, kind of being held up as this victim hero almost. And that's shocking. I mean, that's a really disgusting sign, I think, of like the rot at the heart of our society, that we hold a woman like that up as a, hero.
And the Home Secretary also points out that the Shawcross report found out that Prevent has applied different thresholds to different ideologies. Even right-wing and centre-right politicians and commentators have at times been wrongly bracketed as extreme right-wing because they've entered into a debate and have a different point of view.
Brilliant. Great start, guys. I really have nothing to add. I think it's a huge issue, but like you say, it's great that Suella Braverman has actually come out and made a statement about this, I think, really early on. You've just seen my interview there with one of our military experts about the war in Ukraine and Zelensky. What did you make, Mike, of his performance at Westminster yesterday?
To put himself forward as a world statesman, absolutely stunning, OK? And you know what? It was so stunning, still wearing the green jacket in that, you know, famous hall at Parliament where only months ago, the Queen's body was lying in state. It was the very same location. He's captivated this country, he's captivated America, captivated the world. Now, I know what you're going to say. What about the content of what he said?
Because, no, I'm going to say, why is he wearing his blimmin' why is he wearing his combat fatigue? It's a very formal occasion. I'm sorry, I feel like he's trying to brainwash us a little bit.
No, I don't. I think he's saying... Don't you remember his first famous quote? I need ammunition, not a ride, when he was offered sanctuary, you know, when the invasion started. And from that moment
he's spent quite a lot of time on aeroplanes since then, jetting back and forth to photo shoots.
He has, but I think only to, you know, keep the level of interest up in what's happening. No, he's got to wear that in much the same way as Fidel Castro always wore a military uniform because, you know, he was head of Cuba. I think what Zelensky's saying here is, I will always be at the head of my people. And I think that's fine. Now, when he says, it was great, wasn't it, the PR act producing the helmet, and the helmet had written on it, "Give us wings," and all that. That's going to be the next big contentious issue. And do you know what I would do, very briefly? We were the first to say we'll give them tanks, but we only gave them 10 because we haven't got many tanks.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I'd do now? I'd give him 6 aeroplanes because we haven't got many aeroplanes, but it might stimulate the major power, the United States of America, to then say, oh, once again, the UK have led the way, I suppose we better follow on. But it's all the techniques with planes, isn't it? It can take 6 months to train a pilot, you know what I mean?
I was just saying. What do you think, Joanna?
Well, I think it's easy to be cynical about these things and to look at Zelensky there in his combat fatigues. My concern is that just... You know, if I was in his position, I'd do the same. You know, he's looking at his country being destroyed. He's looking at his family, his friends being killed, young men going out to fight for their country on a daily basis. If I was in that position, I would do anything I could to get what I needed to save my country.
And would you negotiate? Because that's what really wound me up when he made his statement just recently saying, I won't negotiate with Putin under any circumstances.
Well, I mean, on what basis would you negotiate? It would be about giving away part of your country, essentially, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be the
keeping a lot of it that he's already seized, Crimea.
Exactly. I mean, negotiation is about compromise. I mean, if somebody, I mean, to use a silly example, if this was my house and my neighbour said, I want a bit of your garden, I like your garden, I want a bit of that. All right, you won't negotiate with me. That's not fair. You've got to negotiate with me. I'd be like, what the hell is there to negotiate over? This is my garden, it's my land. You know, you extend that to Ukraine. This is his country.
That in itself is the start of the negotiation, isn't it? Saying, I'm not going to negotiate. You know what I mean? I mean, he's made his position absolutely clear. It's now for Putin to try and, you know, move towards him.
That negotiation is, we will never be a member of NATO, which was Putin's initial concern, having a NATO country on his border, given that the majority of the Donbass residents were already Russians, Russian-speaking people, which is where, you know, that was his excuse for going in, as I said earlier. The idea that they've given up on any sort of negotiation whatsoever, I find deeply troubling when billions of pounds of our money is going.
But you see, I think the principle of national sovereignty is just something that's really, really important to me. I mean, at the end of the day, it's why I voted for Brexit, because I think being an independent nation, being able to make your own decisions about the future of your country is the most important thing. And, you know, having national sovereignty means that you get to decide whether you join NATO or join the EU. Obviously, I hope they don't join the EU. I'm against the EU. But the Ukrainian people need to be able to make that decision.
We've got to move on, guys. But actually, that makes me realise one point that was in this Prevent report, which was saying it's basically saying that the threshold for what was considered to be extremely right-wing was very low, including being a Brexit.
Exactly. They're probably on the phone about us already.
We've got to go, guys. Right, after this quick break, the UK is set to push ahead with plans to create a digital pound currency. Are you ready? You do not want to miss this. It might be the most important thing you see all week. It's after the news.
Good morning, it's 10:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Around 70 members of UK International Search and Rescue have arrived in Turkey. The team of volunteers includes firefighters and medics. Nearly 16,000 people are now known to have died after Monday's devastating earthquakes in the south of the country and northern Syria. The Disasters Emergency Committee is coordinating a rapid response by 14 UK charities, including the British Red Cross and Oxfam. The government says it will match any donations made by the public. Volodymyr Zelensky is addressing European Parliament at an EU summit in Brussels. He's lobbying leaders to provide more weapons to Ukraine in the fight against Russia. He's told EU leaders his country is defending itself against what he calls the biggest anti-European force of the modern world. The Ukrainian president travelled to Brussels this morning after a brief stop in Paris, one that followed his surprise visit to the UK yesterday. Rishi Sunak said nothing's off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Strike action by firefighters has been put on hold while union members consider an increased pay offer. Members of the UK's Fire Brigades Union held last-minute talks with bosses yesterday. The union says it's considering a revised 7% pay rise backdated to July last year and another 5% from this July. They'll now ballot members on the proposal. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting Cornwall today. It's their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate will visit the harbour town of Falmouth to learn about the county's naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Bev will be back in just a moment.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Very good morning. This is Bev Turner Today on GB News. It is 10:38. Thank you for joining us. So, I've been talking about this for a long time, but nobody would listen. It seems the UK is set to push ahead with plans to create a digital pound currency. Now, this is a little bit complicated, but it's something that everybody really does need to understand. So joining me now for the analysis is the author and fintech analyst, Susie Violet Ward. Good morning, Susie.
Morning, Bev.
Is it an estimate? Is it? Am I exaggerating to say that this is what we should all be talking about, but we're not?
Absolutely.
I'm not exaggerating, am I?
Not slightly. Every person that I come in contact with in the public, I ask them, do you know what a CBDC is or a central bank digital currency? And nobody knows. But the Bank of England have been researching this for years. It's been on the card for years. But unfortunately, the government like to manage perception.
Yeah. Why would they be worried about us understanding this in more detail?
Because it's money that can be programmed, which means that they can tell you when to spend it, what to spend it on, and how to spend it. And they can also assign government agendas to the spending. So, for example, if they think that a certain area of the economy needs more stimulus, they'll push you towards that. If they think that we shouldn't eat as much meat, they'll stop you from buying meat. If they think that you've flown on too many holidays, they will stop you from going on holiday.
Now, that sounds like the stuff of a dystopian nightmare and a fantasy. Tell us, Susie, the facts about this. Like, who is talking about it? Because I remember, was it about a year ago or so, when Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, did a video saying we're so excited about a central banking digital currency. And the Bank of England requested publicly to find out whether it would be programmable. I didn't hear the answer to that question. What happened?
I think originally they said it wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I think they're slowly starting to change the narrative on that, and it almost certainly will be programmable. And even if they say it's not going to be programmable, it doesn't mean that they can't change the rules
at any particular time. So how does it work? Tell me what this would work, because some people say, well, it's just the same as Bitcoin.
No.
How is it different?
Bitcoin is a decentralised protocol that is a peer-to-peer cash that cannot be interfered by bad monetary policy, by governments, and you can send a digital cash to anybody on the planet with a mobile phone for pennies in seconds. What we're talking about is a highly centralised banking system. In fact, it will probably get rid of our commercial banks. And what we know, how the government actually deal with our data, I don't really want them holding it on a central database where they have all the powers that be over it. At least at the moment, it's scattered around and we have different institutions looking after different areas. There's almost a segregation of duties of sorts, but this will be a very highly centralised protocol.
What would the benefits be to the general public?
Ease of use, I think, would be the only benefit.
Convenience.
Convenience, and that's how they're going to sell it. But they won't tell you everything else. They won't tell you how it will be programmed. They won't tell you that it's a spy coin. They won't tell you that they're trying to phase out cash and that they want to track absolutely everything that you're doing. And the only way that you can opt out of this peacefully is by using Bitcoin. But unfortunately, they've used the term Britcoin very clever to try and muddy the waters.
So in a way, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is by no means my area of expertise, but Bitcoin was troubling to governments because it takes the money out of that regulated financial system.
Yes.
And therefore, this is, in effect, a reaction to the freedoms that people were discovering to spend money in their own ways.
Yes.
OK. Are there any countries around the world at the moment that have this already?
It's been piloted in China and India. So the way that our media is run is we look to certain countries like China and we think that it's an authoritarian, totalitarian state, and we feel a little bit sorry for them, but we don't realise that the same thing's happening to us and we're actually using them as a template.
Right. So what kind of timescale are we looking at here for this? Do we know yet?
I think originally they thought it would be 2030. 2030 is the date that everything seems to be happening by. I think that's when they want the actual Great Reset to happen.
Yeah, well, the Agenda 2030 is all there.
Exactly.
And some of those ambitions will not necessarily be all bad. And some people would argue that we have so many people on the planet now that we do need an element of organisation, that humanity might need organising. That will be the logic.
Except I think we're heading for a population crash anyway, because we're going to have a lot of old people and not enough young people to support them. So okay. I don't necessarily buy that argument. And I think that if we can break it down into smaller, more local communities, I think that humanity would be served better.
So let's talk about this cashless society that we're moving towards. Obviously, a lot of this happened under the auspices of COVID and lockdowns, was that cash was seen to carry a virus and therefore lots of shops were not accepting it. Now, of course, we've come out of that and a lot of shops have said, well, for convenience, we no longer use cash. That can be very difficult for certain members of the public who use cash, or perhaps the elderly that don't have the same access to banking, and you know, the huge social change afoot. What are the implications for you of us not having a cash in the system?
Every single thing you do will be tracked and it will be recorded and it will be there forever. So there's no anonymity. It will all be taken away from you, and it will go one step further and they will be able to control what you spend your money on. And it could even go further, because they may even start programming contracts, employment contracts, where employers can say, we don't want you to do this, and therefore when we pay you that money, there'll be requirements attached to it.
You've been writing about this in various publications and researching this, Susie, for a while. I think it was in City AM.
City AM are one of the only newspapers that have dared to publish this.
Why is that?
I think people don't fully understand it. And I think if they did understand it, they wouldn't be doing the government's bidding. I'm not even 100% certain that the government understand what they're trying to implement.
You mean certain members of the government? So there might be... Rishi Sunak understands it.
He does.
Jeremy Hunt fully understands it.
I hope he doesn't, because otherwise it's a very sinister plan.
But is it... Once this changes... So people will say, OK, well, they may be planning to this huge upheaval of our financial systems and our monetary system. But, of course, if the Conservatives lose the next election and Keir Starmer comes in, then maybe these ambitions will be... ditched and we will return to cash.
No, this is something that's been happening globally. There's a CBDC tracker where you can actually look to see the different stages that each country are at. So India and China are further ahead, and there are other countries, but most countries are looking to implement some form of CBDC. So this is a global initiative.
You may not know the answer to this, Susie, and it might be a bit mean because, of course, we're all sort of scrabbling around to find the facts around this, and it isn't entirely transparent. And I think that's one of the reasons I really wanted to discuss it, because there is information. I say that Rishi Sunak getting very excited about it. We've seen videos of that before he was Prime Minister. But what can people do? Where can they go to understand this? What can they do? Write to their MPs, ask for more clarification, keep using cash if you have a problem with the idea of this?
I think once they've decided that they're going to move forward, they will move forward. There is a consultation form on the Bank of England website where you can log your concerns, but I can't see that it would make any difference because, as I said, this is a global agenda. This isn't something that the UK have just decided to do. It's being rolled out across all countries. They're just at different stages. So they will try and force us away from cash. I don't think spending more cash is going to stop it. I think the only way to stop it is to peacefully opt out, and we need to start using a peer-to-peer cash system that sits outside government control, and the only protocol is Bitcoin. They will try and muddy the waters with other cryptocurrencies, but they're all centralised too. People just don't realise. There is no CEO with Bitcoin. Nobody owns it. It's a people's army.
It's such a complex issue, isn't it? And I think if you don't really understand Bitcoin, which a lot of us don't, and a lot of people watching this may not understand how Bitcoin works, it's very, very difficult to work out how this will connect, how this will affect us in the future. When we talk about these big social changes, Susie, I always want to try and put it into a kind of real-world example of what the difference would be if you were using a centralised banking digital currency that is programmable. And that would look like what? So if I say I want to go into the supermarket and I want to buy my food. You mentioned it at the beginning, but give me a few more examples. Like what may we be allowed or not allowed to do?
So I think there's a drive to eating less meat, and if they decide that furthers the climate change
to save
agenda,
the planet,
then they will implement that as a governmental social agenda, and they will put limits on the amount of meat that you can buy.
Right. So it could be the travel, the amount of the types of foods that we could eat. In China, I know we're not there yet, and I don't want to terrify people, but the social credit system in China is also tied to a biometric ID system.
We're heading that way. We're heading towards digital IDs. And so everything will be on a digital ID, and it can be switched off. So your entire ID could just go.
OK. Susie Violet Ward, thank you so much. I think we've barely scratched the surface of that topic. But thank you very much for joining us here this morning. Right, let me know what you think. OK, the Prime Minister has been addressing broadcasters in central Cornwall, apparently. Let's have a listen.
Family is really important to me, and the government is keen to support families. That's why I'm delighted that we've announced hundreds of millions of pounds of new funding to roll out family hubs across the country. The centres like the one we're in today in Cornwall that bring together local services to support especially young parents to raise their families. Fantastic to meet the team here and see the incredible work that they're doing, and I'm delighted we're going to be able to do more of this right across the country.
When you speak to families,
It's very loud, isn't it?
which are astronomically high in this country, highest or one of the highest in the OECD.
What's he doing in
And it's getting
Cornwall?
worse because loads of nurseries are closing. Surely this has to be a priority. What are you going to do about childcare?
Definitely part of supporting strong families is making sure we have a really good childcare system that's affordable and convenient for parents. So we have lots of different ways to support parents. For example, for those on universal credit, they can receive 85% of their childcare costs reimbursed. For those working parents with 3 and 4-year-olds, they can get up to 30 hours of free childcare. And for other parents, they can receive £2,000 a year back through something called tax-free childcare. But I know not everyone always understands the different offers, so I'd urge people to go online, look at the Help for Households website on gov.uk, where you can see the type of support that's available for childcare, because it is important that we support families with childcare, and there are a range of ways that we do that.
Now, we may have forgotten this to a degree because not much on the political agenda in terms of energy costs and what's happening in April. Martin Lewis has written to the Chancellor today saying that he reckons 1.7 million households will go into fuel poverty. It's too late, he says, to look at this in the budget. Are you potentially going to look at this ahead of the budget?
Well, we know energy costs are a major challenge for the country, and that's why in the autumn statement, the Chancellor announced considerable support for families up and down the country with their energy bills. Direct payments of up to £900 to help the most vulnerable families. Obviously, we have the energy price guarantee, which limits the increase in bills for families. For pensioners, we're providing a record increase, and the national living wage is also going up, putting an extra £1,600 in people's pay packets. So there's considerable support for people with energy bills. But that's why earlier this week I announced a change in how government works. We created a brand new department for energy security so that we can really focus on this issue and get people's bills down. One of my priorities is to halve inflation, and we're going to do that by reducing energy costs. That's why this week we created a brand new department led by one of my top ministers so that we can really get to grips with this issue and reduce people's energy bills over time.
OK, let's focus on Ukraine. You talked yesterday that nothing's off the table, potentially fighter jets might be on the table. The truth is, though, we can't do that. We haven't got these fighter jets. Some of the ones we have got don't really work properly. And even if we did, it's going to take a long time. It's not really sustainable. You're giving false hope almost by suggesting we could offer fighter jets.
Well, one thing I'm really proud of, and everyone should be really proud of the leading role that the United Kingdom has played in providing military and other assistance to Ukraine. And as Prime Minister, I announced first amongst G7 countries that we would provide main battle tanks to Ukraine. That catalysed other countries doing the same. That's going to make a major difference in the coming months in the conflict. I also had very good conversations with President Zelensky yesterday about our ability to provide long-range missiles that they don't currently have, which again are going to make a big difference in the struggle against Russian aggression. And of course, we're talking about further support, potentially with aircraft as well. The important first step of that journey is to make sure that we provide the training for Ukrainian pilots to be able to use that very sophisticated equipment. And we announced yesterday that again we'll be the first nation to start training Ukrainian pilots on NATO standard aircraft. That's a really positive forward step, and we will continue to stand by Ukraine because we want to see them victorious.
OK, just two final questions. One on Turkey and the earthquake there. We know today, I think, it's the launch of the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal. Is the government willing to match every pound that's raised through that? I think it's 2 million at the moment. Could the government look at potentially going further?
Well, obviously what's happening in Turkey is just an awful, awful tragedy, and the scale of human loss is something that is hard to comprehend. I spoke to President Erdogan of Turkey just the other day to express our solidarity and sympathy and make sure that we provide all the support we can as a country. People should know that we sent very quickly 77 specialist search and rescue teams who arrived a couple of days ago, started work straight away. They're already making a difference on the ground, and of course all ministers are in touch with their counterparts and to continue providing all assistance. And the government has said it will match £5 million, in fact, of everyone's contribution to the DEC appeal. So please, if you give generously, know that the government will match that and we can get that extra support to the people on the ground who need it.
And finally, what would you say to your colleagues who want to bring back the death penalty in this country.
Well, that's not my view, that's not the government's view, but we are united in the Conservative Party in wanting to be absolutely relentless in bearing down on crime and making sure people are safe and feel safe. That's why we recently tightened up sentencing laws for the most violent criminals so they spend longer in prison. It's why we're on our way to having 20,000 more police officers on our streets, and we're giving those police officers more powers to tackle crime, whether it's stop and search or just this week in Parliament, we're giving police officers the power to tackle violent and extremist protesters. That's because we want to make sure people are safe, they feel safe, and that's what we're delivering.
Talking to Darren McCaffrey in Cornwall. Everyone's in Cornwall this morning, aren't they? Joanna Williams, I was sitting there listening to him banging on about the family hub and how this is going to save the family. It used to be called the Sure Start programme, didn't it? I can see no difference in what he's announcing.
Absolutely not. I mean, I completely agree. And this is a bit embarrassing, it seems to me, because we just keep on reinventing the wheel in this country. What's wrong with us? I mean, 3 children myself, I can speak from personal experience to say that childcare is phenomenally expensive. I think we've got like the second most expensive nursery provision out of all the countries in Europe. So like, make it cheaper. Don't go around funding new centres. We don't need new centres, new family hubs. I mean, even just the word family hub suggests this isn't just about childcare, isn't just about having a nursery place that you can use for a few hours whilst you go off to work. But this is much more about intervening in family lives, telling parents basically that they're doing it wrong. You know, unless you've asked your 3-year-old what his pronouns are that day, you're a bad mother. You know, it's about interfering in family life. It's not about just cheap, affordable childcare for parents who need it whilst they go to work.
Are we just too cynical, Mike?
Well, John has raised a very good point there. I've never had children, right, but I've worked in industries like this most of my life, which are time intensive. The number of times when I've been running a department, I've had to let a female member of staff go home because the nanny has fallen sick or something like that, which means somebody's got to get home and look after the children. And I've always felt incredible sympathy for my female colleagues in our business, quite a ruthless business, and, you know, if you're not there, somebody else can step in and all that, who've always had another interest in life as big as their job, and that is their children.
Do you ever say to them, send your husband home to look after them?
Well, I do. I have on many occasions.
Radical, I know.
I mean, for me, it was a choice not to have children, OK? But for those who have, I totally agree with you. And you know, if I've had a female colleague in a particularly important job, I've actually got exasperated and said, well, you know, can't they call your husband and get him to go home or something like that? And it's just a blank stare, you know. Are you mad? You know, that never happens, and that kind of thing.
Though, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should. So what I'm saying is that Joanna's plea about the cost of childcare in this country is overwhelmingly a tax on women workers.
It is predominantly.
And that's why you've got to do something about it. And that's why people like me should form some form of taxation for me to help pay to assist women professionals to bring their children up if they're working for me and I'm getting the benefit of their skills.
You just think, you know what, if it's a family hub and you're going to have advice about breastfeeding and have advice about childcare, just provide decent breastfeeding support and decent childcare support. Anyway, I think we've reached peak cynicism, haven't we? I think. Right, we've come to the end of our first hour. I can't believe how quickly that's gone. I'm going to be joined by Conservative MP Bob Seeley just after this quick break, who sits on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, to get his thoughts on sending fighter jets to Ukraine. All of that after this very short break. See you in a minute.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pearce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Before midday, we're going to be covering President Zelensky's tour of the EU and how our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says that nothing is off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets for Ukraine. Is that what you want your taxpayers' money spent upon? Not according to my inbox this morning. Do let me know. And a Christian mother who's suing her son's school for forcing him to take part in a pride parade. We talked about this actually last week. She's going to have her case heard in court today. I'll bring you the latest on that. I'm also going to be looking into the planned increase in corporation taxes and how it will impact businesses with a very special report from our wonderful Liam Halligan. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news with Rihanna.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Around 70 members of UK International Search and Rescue have arrived in Turkey. The team of volunteers includes firefighters and medics. Nearly 16,000 people are now known to have died after Monday's devastating earthquakes in the south of the country and northern Syria. Dozens of British charities are launching an appeal today to raise funds for those affected. The Disasters Emergency Committee is coordinating a rapid response by 14 charities, including the British Red Cross and Oxfam. The government says it will match any donations made by the public. Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed European Parliament at an EU summit in Brussels. He's been lobbying leaders to provide more weapons to Ukraine in the fight against Russia. He told EU leaders his country is defending itself against what he calls the biggest anti-European force of the modern world. The head of the EU Parliament said the EU needs to consider giving Ukraine jets quickly. Zelensky travelled to Brussels this morning after a brief stop in Paris, one that followed his surprise visit to the UK yesterday. Rishi Sunak said nothing's off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Consumer analyst Martin Lewis has called for the planned rise in the energy price guarantee in April to be scrapped. The average bill is expected to rise from £2,500 to £3,000 if the cap is amended. But the founder of MoneySavingExpert.com has written to the Chancellor asking him to cancel the proposed increase. Mr. Lewis claims it's no longer necessary because wholesale energy prices have come down substantially. He's being supported by charities including Citizens Advice and National Energy Action. Rishi Sunak says he's created a brand new energy department to focus on tackling the energy crisis.
My priorities is to halve inflation, and we're going to do that by reducing energy costs. That's why this week we created a brand new department led by one of my top ministers so that we can really get to grips with this issue and reduce people's energy bills over time.
Strike action by firefighters has been put on hold while union members consider an increased pay offer. Members of the UK Fire Brigades Union held last-minute talks with bosses yesterday after rejecting an offer of a 5% increase. The union says it's considering a revised 7% pay rise backdated to July last year and another 5% from this July. They'll now ballot members on the proposal. Meanwhile, university staff and physiotherapists are striking today in the latest wave of industrial action sweeping the country. Around 70,000 university and college union members are walking off the job across 150 universities. Meanwhile, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy are striking at 33 trusts in England. It's accused the government of being intransigent in refusing to discuss pay for the current financial year. An underwater search expert says the case of missing mother of two Nicola Bulley is a complete mystery. That's after his team were unable to find her. Peter Faldings was called in to find the dog walker who went missing almost 2 weeks ago. Lancashire Police says it still believes Nicola Bulley fell into the River Wyre. Superintendent Sally Riley has described the search as unprecedented, with 40 detectives following 500 lines of inquiry. The Prince and Princess of Wales are visiting Cornwall today. It's their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate will visit the harbour town of Falmouth to learn about its naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. It's Prince William's second official visit to the area after he toured Newquay last November. The Business and Trade Secretary is on her way to Mexico. She's looking to form new trading arrangements post-Brexit. Kemi Badenoch will hold talks with her counterparts on the UK becoming part of a trans-Pacific partnership involving 11 countries. That includes Australia, Canada, Chile and Japan. On her 2-day visit of Mexico City, she'll also look to update Britain's 20-year-old free trade agreement with the country to involve digital services and technology. The Prime Minister has rejected calls for the return of the death penalty made by Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson. In an interview with The Spectator, Mr Anderson said that nobody's ever committed a crime after being executed. Well, the former Labour councillor who converted to the Tories was handed his new role on Tuesday amid a cabinet reshuffle. The death penalty for murder in the UK was scrapped in 1969. It was completely abolished for all crimes in 1998. And the number of people in England waiting for care has risen slightly, but remains below the recent record high, according to new figures. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start routine hospital treatment in December. That's up from the previous month, but less than the 7.21 million in October. That was the highest number since records began. It's also found that around 1,200 people have been waiting more than 2 years to start treatment at the end of last year. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up on the show this morning. How will the planned corporation tax increase impact British businesses? I've got a special report from our brilliant economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. He's also going to be joining me in the studio. And the author, Joanna Williams, and journalist Mike Parry will be back for the next hour to debate some of the other biggest stories of the day. Of course, you are my third panellist. Do get in touch. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. You've already been getting in touch this morning. Thank you so much. Loads of messages about Ukraine and whether we are willing or not to keep supplying jets and further resources to Zelensky. Barry says, if we do back down, Putin will have the green light to do whatever he wants in Eastern Europe. There is no point in trying to negotiate a peaceful end to this conflict. Whereas Chris has got in touch to say this is madness. They are literally playing Russian roulette with all of our lives. Now, the legal case of a Christian mother who's suing her son's school over a pride parade is set to be heard today. Izzy Montague made headlines after taking her son's school to court, claiming that they forced her 4-year-old son to take part in a pride parade despite the family's Christian beliefs. Well, joining me now is GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins, who is at the Royal Courts this morning. Good morning, Paul. What do we know about this case? It's the first one of its kind, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, absolutely. It's the first time a court has been asked to decide on the legality of teaching or scrutinising the legality of teaching LGBT values in primary school. It is scheduled for an 8-day hearing, started last Wednesday, so it should conclude either today or tomorrow. And just to give you a little bit more background to the case, if we go back to June 2018, Heavers Primary School in South London wrote to parents saying that it was inviting their children to take part in a pride parade to celebrate the differences that make them and their family special. Now, Izzy Montague wrote back to the school saying that she was concerned about her 4-year-old son being involved in a public display of adherence to views that she did not accept because of her Christianity. Now, the school said that her child couldn't opt out. It also went on to ban her from the school grounds, saying that that staff did not feel safe around her. Now, she claimed the school picked on her 4-year-old son. It gave her him a 3-hour detention. So she is now suing the school, supported by the Christian Centre, the Christian Legal Centre, and they are suing on the grounds of direct and indirect discrimination, also victimisation and breach of statutory duty under the Education Act 1996 and the Humanitarian. So there are big implications depending on how the ruling goes. Just to give you the school's response, they say that as a school we have a duty, as stated by the Department for Education and reinforced by the early years foundation stage framework, to promote fundamental British values as part of the spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of our pupils. This includes teaching our pupils the important values of tolerance, inclusivity and equality, so that everyone in our community feels safe, included and comfortable to be themselves.
Thank you, Paul. We'll watch that with interest. Paul Hawkins there. Let me know what you think about that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Now, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, promised a low-tax, high-growth economy last summer, but this year he's set to go ahead with a planned tax rise on firms' profits from 19% to 25%. Manufacturers complain that this increase, along with the withdrawal of emergency help with firms' energy bills, could kill some companies. Well, one man who will know if this is true or not, of course, is Liam Halligan. Good morning, Liam.
Hello, Bev.
Now, do we want to watch a film that you've made before I talk to you?
Yeah, why not?
Shall we? OK, here it is. Run VT, as they say in television.
Clevedon Fasteners opened in 1939 to make the rivets and bolts for new Spitfires. This proud West Midlands firm now sees a new threat on the horizon. Because in April, corporation tax is rising from 19 to 25%, just as the government withdraws support for Clevedon's huge energy bills.
The government's taking the support that we have been getting on energy away. The corporation tax is apparently going to go up if they're stupid enough to do it. And so all of those things are going to combine to make April and the subsequent months very, very difficult.
Clevedon's energy costs have lately tripled to £16,000 a month. They'll rise again in April as emergency help is withdrawn. Input costs have also spiralled, with mild steel doubling and stainless steel up threefold. And Steve says this hike in corporation tax is based on what he calls ridiculously downbeat official forecasts.
Quite frequently, the Treasury and the Office of Budget Responsibility have been wrong. They are forecasts. They always tend to be on the gloomy side, and they're basically driving us into a deeper recession.
In March 2021, the Office for Budget Responsibility said government borrowing would soar to £234 billion a year, which arguably forced ministers to spend less and push up tax rates. As it turned out, though, borrowing was just £125 billion, well over £100 billion less than the OBR had predicted. Had ministers known that, they may have felt able to cut taxes or spend more on public services. The OBR insists this corporation tax rise will raise £18 billion a year. Steve says it will kill off many companies instead, while those that do survive will invest less. The boss of the Confederation of British Metal Formers, representing firms employing 40,000 workers, agrees with Steve.
It totally stifles investment. It's another worry to the business owners. You know, they've got wages to pay, suppliers to pay. they do want to make a profit, but they also want to invest in the company and invest in their people. They can't do that because corporation tax is taking more money away from them. It just stifles growth.
The Treasury told GB News that
firms with profits below £250,000 will be protected from the full rate of corporation tax, and those making under £50,000 will pay no corporation tax at all.
Steve wants Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to scrap this corporation tax rise in next month's spring statement. But he says ministers have no respect for manufacturing.
It's typical of governments of all colours, I'm afraid. Manufacturing represents 2.7 million people, really good, proper jobs, £36,000 average wage. We pay a lot of tax. We keep the pubs and the cafes going, and basically they keep hammering us. They just keep hammering us.
Liam Halligan, GB News in Sutton Coldfield.
Liam, these videos you keep doing for us are so brilliant and they're so depressing, and you keep coming across the same sort of business person working incredibly hard and with the same message.
Kind of business person that doesn't usually get on the telly.
Yeah.
Or if they are on the telly, they get like a 10-second soundbite or something. Steve Hardiman there, I wanted to give him scope to express himself. He and his business partners have really taken a bet on Clevedon Fasteners. Yeah. As I said at the beginning, this is a company that was founded to create the rivets and bolts that kept Spitfires together in 1939. It's an incredibly proud company. It has a world-class reputation. It exports all over the place, 30 employees. And Steve thinks the combination of the removal of help with his massive energy bills, they've gone up from...
They tripled.
They've gone up, actually, they went up from 5,000 to 16,000 a month, right, over the last couple of years. And they're going to go up again in April when the energy support package is removed. On top of that, corporation tax is going up from 19 to 25%, taking 6% off his margin in what is a very low-margin business. So that means he's not going to invest, he's not going to expand, he's not going to employ anyone else. He's fighting, as so many small and medium-sized enterprises are, to keep their staff, to try and get through this problem. And I've had so many emails over recent weeks from business leaders who kind of see me and GB News as a place where they can get a fair hearing. We should do a lot more on this, in my view. And so many business leaders have contacted me, not the big guns, the big companies, they're really good at avoiding corporation tax. They use all the offsets. And these are SME companies. Cash flow is everything. And they think that this rising corporation tax, well, if it doesn't kill off their businesses, so they pay no tax whatsoever, it's going to mean they invest a lot less, so the government will get less tax revenue overall.
I tell you, one of the most shocking bits of that particular item there was that OBR prediction.
Oh, unbelievable.
Being £100 billion.
108 billion out.
108 billion.
So this is a prediction that they...
I'm so tired of men doing models that don't work, Liam Halligan. It seems to be the root of all our problems. Is somebody sits there and they go, I'm going to put some numbers in, and then it's going to come out, we're going to decide everything based on this, and then they're wrong.
Well, let me talk as a former professional economist, which isn't a phrase you often hear on Bev Turner,
What do you mean,
right?
former? You're not professional anymore.
Well, no, I'm a journalist, but, these forecasts, all the mathematical hocus-pocus, spreadsheets everywhere, Greek letters, lots of algebra. I've done all that stuff. I spent a lot of my young life doing that stuff. In the end, it's just educated guesswork. That's what it is. We can't know the future, and we take these OBR, these Treasury forecasts 4 or 5 years out, and we treat them like holy writ. The forecast I put up on the screen there in that package, and radio listeners heard too, was a forecast made in March 2021 for April 21 to April 22. So at the beginning of the forecast period, they made the forecast, and instead of borrowing 254 billion quid, the British government borrowed 108 billion pounds less, which is unbelievable miss.
Which means
ministers feel completely corralled. There's no way they could have done tax cuts.
Yeah.
They couldn't have used the state's balance sheet to stimulate the economy as they otherwise would have done. I mean, the implications of that massive missed forecast, which I had to dig out those numbers from the national accounts, they're not press released, are absolutely massive. And that's why we need to take a little bit of time to highlight them.
I can't have you here without just getting a very quick response to that interview that I did with the journalist earlier, the fintech expert Susie, about the incoming central banking digital currency. What do you make of it?
So A lot of people say cryptocurrency's dead because of the FTX scandals, Sam Bankman-Fried. I don't buy that at all. What Sam Bankman-Fried did was a lot more to do with being a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
I think he's still denying wrongdoing, so he's not here to defend himself.
Yeah.
And it was a lot less to do with cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Look, cryptocurrency is an incredible technological advance. The reason they've become so popular is because central banks around the world have printed more regular money, and money has its value in its scarcity. The thing about something like Bitcoin is there will only ever be 21 million of them.
But the
that's why I value.
Coin, the Brit coin that we're going to have here, that Rishi Sunak's been getting very excited about, good or bad?
Well, central bank digital currencies are completely different from cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
I am concerned about the fact that we're taking cash completely out of society. I am concerned about the extent to which that imposes control on ordinary people, and it gives the government the ability to know absolutely everything about absolutely what in our lives, what we're spending. It's like a kind of surveillance culture. Now, I'm not saying that the Bank of England is being run by, you know, any kind of conspiracy, but I do think at the very least, and you're doing it, and congratulations, Bev, we need to discuss the democratic and constitutional implications of these digital currencies and not see them as just a technical change.
Just not going to affect us, because it is. Liam, you're brilliant, as always. Right, after the break, calling children overweight is now being branded a fat shaming. We're going to get stuck into that after this very quick break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr.
Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:23. We've had a very busy show this morning. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Mike Parry is still here with me, and author and academic Joanna Williams also with me. Right, thanks, guys. I feel like we can take a little breath. It's been a bit of a busy one.
Yes, absolutely.
You're right, Mike. Right,
yeah, full of energy in action.
Full of energy. Here we
Yeah.
go. Right, this is a story talking about in this country we have this thing called the National Child Measurement Programme, which was introduced a few years ago, wasn't it, Joanna? And it was weighing children, taking their height, in order to be a statistical gathering, a data gathering service. So Queen Mary University of London have looked at the results of this study. They want to assess the impact it had on children judged to be overweight. And what did they conclude, Jo?
Well, they've said that it's damaging for children's self-esteem if they're told that they're overweight, and that this can have very bad consequences for a child's mental health. But it just seems to me that we've really got a very unhealthy obsession in this country with children's weight generally, whether that's over telling them that they're fat, obsessing over what they eat, how much they eat. And my motto really is just let kids be kids. I think if we're worried about children's weight, you know, rather than weighing and measuring them and obsessing about what they might eat, let them have more time for PE, give them more time for playtime, get them walking to school. All those things would be much better. So this National Child Measurement Programme, it's the idea that you weigh and measure every child when they're 5 and again when they're 11, and you send a letter home for parents. Now, full disclosure, I withdrew my children from this.
Good.
Because I just thought, you know what, it is no one's business other than mine and my husband's and my child's how much my children weigh. You know, it's nothing to do with a researcher, with a teacher, with anyone else other than me. And actually, as a parent, I don't need anyone to tell me like a nice tick and a pat on the back, yes, your child's the right weight, or a cross, no, your child's overweight. I will be in charge of that. Thank you very much.
But what if your child is suffering with their health, Mike, and they are desperately overweight? I think we've got about 10% of children now are clinically obese by the time they start at primary school.
That's right.
And that's hard to ever get over. It makes it harder for that child for the rest of their life.
If a child's got a medical condition, then obviously we've got a good enough National Health Service in this country to give the child treatment to try and help that condition. This is a load of absolute baloney. I can tell when a kid is overweight. He looks like Billy Bunter, right? And the kid next to him doesn't look like Billy Bunter. You don't need all these tests, you know. You don't need to start measuring. We've all seen the stories, which Joanna's alluded to, about kids being sent home with a letter, a perfectly healthy kid sent home with a letter to say your child is clinically obese because we found 1/4 of an inch of flesh around his stomach. It's absolute nonsense. When I was at school, we had a lad called Bob Jordan, right? And Bob, if you're watching now, I'm sorry if I was hard on you. I told him he wasn't going to get into the football team until he lost a lot of weight. He was the fat kid in the class, and he went away and lost a lot of weight.
Isn't the difference, though, when we were growing up, there was one fat kid in the class, right?
Yeah.
Now, half of them you would look at and go, do you know, more, I would say, are... We've normalised a bigger child. A child now who often is a healthy weight, people would look, oh, you know...
I'm a bit sceptical about some of these statistics.
So
because when we talk about obesity, well, we're using this BMI measure on kids, which kind of takes your height and takes your weight and does some complex mathematical formula and then comes out and says, oh, obese. Actually, that's very unscientific in general for everyone, because rugby players, you know, international athletes can be categorised as obese because their muscle mass is heavy. But to apply that very crudely to children who are growing, you know, might be having a growth spurt, might grow out before they grow up.
You're so right again. Look at this I've got from the latest national figures. National Child Measurement Programme says that by 11, 23.4% of children in this country are obese. Rubbish. You tell me, 1 in 4 children at 11.
Easily.
Right, well, in that case, Bev, I'll move on to my next point, and that is that the main responsibility for children not becoming obese is that of their parents.
Yes.
And if their parents taken down to McDonald's 3 times a week and then stuff pizza in the face on the other 2 days a week, the child's going to get obese because the parent is being idle in its parenting responsibilities.
But the big question then is, if you were a parent and you got a letter home like this, is it going to make you stop and change your behaviour?
You should shame the parent.
But do you know what? It's going to cause arguments in the house.
Exactly.
Like so many of these things, it causes division in households, because then the mother gets the letter or the father father saying, you know, what was his name? Your mate at school?
Bob Jordan.
Bob Jordan's a bit overweight. Bob Jordan used to eat a few less Doritos, right? Or any other snack available. And then the poor kid who's been brought up in a house where he might have access to too much high carbohydrate foods, let's say, and not getting enough exercise. He's then got his mum going, look, we've got a letter from the school, don't eat that, you're making life difficult for me. And then it causes division in the household as well. It's
absolutely.
It's the state.
But that's weak parenting again, isn't it, Bev? Don't you from a very early age have to say to children, I'm in charge of what goes inside your body because you're actually not old enough to make your mind up about what's good and what's not good. It might taste nice, but it's not good for you.
But again, then we're focusing on like what they eat. We're focusing on what children put into their bodies, which is clearly part of the equation. But also exercise. You know, children lead so sedentary nowadays compared to in the past.
That's a very good point.
And schools, I think, are partly to blame for this. They've cut down on the amount of time children have for playtime. You know, just to be unsupervised in the school playground, running around, playing catchy kisses, chasers, whatever.
And got rid of playing fields.
Exactly, rid of playing fields, cut down the time because they're worried about all the health and safety implications.
Totally agree.
And there was that brilliant head in Scotland, I remember a few years ago. She won an award for it and she introduced the Daily Mile. So the children had to walk a mile at school every... It sounds like people go, oh, walk a mile. But they just had to go out and they went round the sports field a few times. Every single class in the school had to do it in the day. And the health of those children increased dramatically.
Exactly.
It's not complicated.
It's not. No. You don't even have to do that, though. I think, you know, 12 o'clock, the bell goes for lunchtime, open the doors, throw a load of footballs and skipping ropes out there and say, see you in an hour, kids.
Yeah, but they're not doing that anymore, are they?
Well, I don't know. I think if you give them nothing else to do and they've got balls
you've already made the point.
stuff like that to play with, they will run around.
They'd rather be on some electronic machine, wouldn't they, than running around in the... And also, I do have sympathy for inner city children because there aren't nature trails in inner cities, are there? You know, they can't go and walk round the field 3 times. What do you do? Walk round the streets.
A big issue as well, of course, is that with our diet messaging that we've had for so many years and that Public Health England plate with the half carbohydrate, half protein, there are so many people now saying that is just not the healthy way to live and we need to give kids more protein and less carbohydrates. And yet, what are we doing? We're taking meat off the menus, particularly in Scotland. Meat is now off the menu in schools in Scotland.
Ridiculous.
So what are they going to replace it with? A big bowl of creamy pasta covered in cheese, and it's just, we've got it all wrong.
Yeah, it is.
I think we're moving on.
Yeah, definitely.
Making me hungry, this. It's making me hungry. It's nearly lunchtime. Right, coming up in just a moment, we're going to see some of the support that's taking place here in the UK for those impacted by the devastating earthquake in Syria and Turkey. I'll see you in just a moment.
It's 11:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. Around 70 members of UK International Search and Rescue have arrived in Turkey. The team of volunteers include firefighters and medics. More than 16,000 people are now known to have died after Monday's devastating earthquakes in the south of the country and northern Syria. Dozens of British charities are launching an appeal today to raise funds for those affected. The Disasters Emergency Committee is coordinating a rapid response by 14 charities, including the British Red Cross and Oxfam. The government says it will match any donations made by the public. Volodymyr Zelensky has addressed European Parliament at an EU summit in Brussels. He's lobbying leaders to provide more weapons to Ukraine in the fight against Russia, which he's referred to as the biggest anti-European force of the modern world. Zelensky travelled to Brussels this morning after a brief stop in Paris, one that followed his surprise visit to the UK yesterday. Rishi Sunak says nothing's off the table when it comes to providing fighter jets to Ukraine. Strike action by firefighters in the UK has been put on hold while union members consider an increased pay offer. Members of the Fire Brigades Union held last-minute talks with bosses yesterday. The union says it's considering a revised 7% pay rise backdated to July last year and another 5% from this July. They'll now ballot members on the proposal. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are in Cornwall today. It's their first official joint trip to the county since taking on their new roles as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. William and Kate are visiting the harbour town of Falmouth to learn about the county's naval heritage, as well as meeting members of the local community. TV online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Bev will be right back.
He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. So, more than 15,000 people have now been killed by the devastating earthquake which hit Turkey and Syria on Monday. The UK government has announced more support for both countries, including vital items such as tents and blankets that will be provided to help survivors cope with sub-zero conditions. So, joining me now for more is GB News' West Midlands reporter Jack Carson. Good morning, Jack. What more do we know about this awful unfolding tragedy, and where are you in terms of bringing to us the story of the help which is provided?
Well, Bev, the story is, as you mentioned, it's nearly now 16,000 people have sadly died because of this earthquake. We know, of course, the devastation in terms of the buildings that have fallen over. There's so many rescue efforts going on in Turkey, in Syria. Of course, one of the big problems when it came to this earthquake was that the two earthquakes were in the short amount of time, but also then the aftershocks that the earthquake caused. One of the aftershocks alone was around 6.5. We know the earthquake was about 7.8 on the Richter scale. This one of the aftershocks alone was 6.5. So you can imagine how unstable, of course, that would have made the buildings, which is why we've seen so many of them collapse. Of course, mass rescue efforts are underway to try and get as many people out from the rubble. But of course, as time goes on, that window when people can be saved, unfortunately, does get smaller and smaller. Not only because, of course, the fact they're under rubble, but because of how cold it is as well. We know in certain parts of Syria the temperature is as low as -6 when it comes to the evening and overnight. But here, back home in Birmingham, we are getting lots and lots of the community come here specifically to the Salma Food Bank and Bearded Bros, who are basically reaching out to the community and as part of their community project, sending over aid to Syria and to Turkey to try and help those families and those people that have now been displaced from their homes. If you just look to the left of me, what you can see is some of the bins here that are going to be loaded on to lorries. We've got toiletries and baby items, of course, all those young people and all those families, non-perishable food as well. We've had lorries and vans come and pick up bedding, and I'm joined now by Imran Hamid, who is the founder of Bearded Bros and is organising this project. Tell me about the project and what it's all about?
As soon as the sort of earthquake happened, Turkey and Syria, we were inundated with messages, emails of people saying, can we do something locally? We specialise in local projects, and we thought, you know what, let's do it. We'd only had the time of Ukraine, so we got stuck in, and we've received, I would say, over 800 emails and messages as text messages over the last 2 days. People just want to come and donate food and clothing to us so that we can get this aid out to people.
And we've seen a lot of people come this morning. What have you had? What's been brought?
Coats, blankets, shoes, trainers, baby milk, nappies, toiletries, you name it, the kitchen sink, everything.
And we've seen lorries in here. Where are these lorries going to go? How's this aid actually going to go and get out to Turkey and Syria?
We have got different charity partners. So at the moment we're liaising with Turkish Airlines to send out some cargo. If that fails, then we got other people who are going to be driving lorries out there. So it's a bit of a longer term measure, collecting clothing and food from here and sending it over there. But I reckon first load 4 to 5 days.
What's the reaction been like? You're such a big part of the community. What's the reaction been like from the community for this tragedy? How are people feeling in this area?
Devastated. That's one word. There's so much coming out on social media. Young kids buried under rubble, mums and dads, everybody. It's been really, really saddening. And this is what it's touched people's hearts on what's happened. It's a tragedy, and people are just extremely saddened. They don't want to just sit there. They want to do something physically, and this is what they're doing.
And tell me a bit about the other projects that you do here. You mentioned Ukraine and how such much of a big an effort that you've put into that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ukraine, we sent over about 200 tons of aid last time we tried. That was our first try, and it went absolutely mental. We had people sending us stuff from abroad, even people travelling from London, Leicester, far afield. Just coming to drop off to us, and together we networked and got the stuff there. This is what we're trying to do with the exact same situation with Turkey and Syria, because they're in trouble right now.
And for people watching at home that might be around this area, how can they get involved with your project and be able to help out?
We have one telephone number, 07767 164 246, or Google Bearded Bros or the Salma Food Bank. Go to our website. Right. At the moment, it's Thursdays and Fridays from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. You can come and drop off stuff to us. Get involved in that manner. Get your used stuff, get your new stuff, whatever you've got, bring it to us. We'll make sure that we'll get it to them.
Imran, thank you so much for joining me this morning. This is the situation here in Birmingham, of course. I mentioned the situation there in Turkey and Syria as the rescue efforts continue.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you very much. Right, my guests are still here, Joanna Williams and Mike Parry. Right, let's get stuck into these stories. This is a really interesting piece in the Mail today. This is about the first-person account of a 14-year-old student or girl who is talking about, she's written about what it's like to be in school now when there is so much obsession with transgender issues. She talks about the fact that she went to the school secretary. She says she has short hair, and the teacher who knew her quite well called her they rather than she, in reference to another teacher saying, she needs a book for something, and they said they need a book. And when the mum called them out, and they said, well, she thought she might be transitioning, as though this is now completely normal, Joanna.
Yeah. I mean, this is really quite an eye-opening account, and I take my hat off to this girl. I mean, the very sad thing is the fact that she's had to be anonymous with this account, the fact that she daren't put her name to it because she's worried about the reaction that she'd get from her friends and from her teachers, just shows how dominant this ideology is in schools and how threatening and how intimidating these people can actually be. But it's eye-watering what she's describing here of if you've got short hair and wear trousers as a girl, that you're assumed to be transitioning. The sheer numbers, she talks about 20 out of her year group of 200, nearly all girls who are now transitioning to be boys, how they're treated as if they're kind of cool and special for transitioning, so they get
being
some
encouraged
kind of
to do
status.
it, aren't they?
Exactly.
They're being encouraged to do it.
They are. It's being normalised.
You look at the original figures, and, look, I have, great empathy for transgender people. I understand the position they're in, and I don't want to stand in the way of what they have to do to try and get themselves to a better life. But I think the number of transgender people in this country is officially about 0.2%. And that's across the whole population.
Yes.
So it might be 0.1% amongst children. So why are children being encouraged to recognise something they might not know anything of? In this very same story that John has just read us, another teacher said Lady Macbeth was neither a man nor a woman. Well, no, Lady Macbeth is actually a woman and has been since Shakespeare wrote the play.
Yes.
So how confusing is that for a young mind?
It is confusing, but I think worse than confusing, it's sexist, because
Of course it
essentially
is.
what we're being told is that if you're a woman who's not stereotypically feminine, kind, nice, all the time gentle, wearing skirts and long hair and dresses, then clearly you must be a man. And so this, rather than this kind of broadening the categories of what expanding what it means to be a woman, to say, look, girls, you know, the world's your oyster. You can do anything. You can dress how you like, be whoever you like, but still be a girl. It's saying, you know, if you're a girl who doesn't quite conform, who's a little bit quirky, is strong-minded, then clearly you must be a boy.
It's fear of offence, though, isn't it, on the part of the teachers? Again, it's the fear from the teachers, I think, of not being able to probably speak up if they suspect this is going too far in schools. Because they believe that the sort of the paradigm is this now. We're there. Like there's been a paradigm shift. No child necessarily has a gender that they were born with, and we all have to.
But who are the teachers frightened of upsetting then? Because the teachers are supposed to be in charge of the school. They're supposed to be looking after the welfare of the children. If a teacher does secretly think, hang on, I'm very uncomfortable with the way the children are now being encouraged to examine their own sexuality and their own identity, surely the teachers are in a position to say this has gone too far. Are you saying it's the head teacher? Are you saying it's the chairman of the governors?
Or are you saying it's some of the parents? They'll be frightened of upsetting some parents who are also indulging these. There is a social contagion. And let's face it, teenagers have always, that's what teenagers are. They look for their tribe, they want to fit in. Or they want a huge amount of attention from doing something a little bit different.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's right.
But I think you're completely right. You know, the teachers are the adults here. And I think, you know, as well as educating, which is obviously their number one job, they've got to safeguard and they've got to protect children. And that means all children. And that means, I think, protecting them from these harmful ideas. You know, no 10, 11, 12-year-old, as far as I'm concerned, no 14, 15-year-old should be wearing a breast binder at school. That is physically harmful for when that child goes to do PE.
It's disgraceful.
Talking earlier about children running around at playtime, you know, and rather than saying, no, you are not wearing a breast binder in schools, teachers are acquiescing to this and are actually making allowances. Oh, you can sit out of PE. You don't need to run around because of your breast binder. Tell them to take the breast binder off. Teachers need to get some courage, be a bit braver and stand up for the children.
And who's the Education Secretary who should be stepping in? And much as we were talking about Sally Braverman, the Home Secretary, earlier in this show, getting stuck into the things she's responsible for. I mean, Michael Gove used to be the Education Secretary. I thought he was quite a good one, actually. Somebody needs to be actively getting in there and saying this philosophy has got to stop.
Well, Gillian Keegan is telling schools they must be more open about their handling of trans issues.
Well, I hope what she means by that is that be more open and then we can, you know, hit on it and stop it, rather than her saying, let's spread the philosophy.
But it's awful, though, because I'm thinking, like, as a parent, I know that in my children's school, there's quite a few kids who are non-binary. You know, my 13-year-old will sort of roll her eyes a bit. Oh, you know what? We've got, you know, three in my year are non-binary, mummy. And you know, the kids themselves don't know what to. Some of the ones who are a little bit on the outside of that particular subculture, which is what it has become. It's become a subculture. They don't really know how to handle it. Now, if there is genuinely a child who has got genuine mental health issues and genuine dislike of themselves, so much so that they want to become a different person altogether, that child needs some proper support. But whilst another 5 in the class go, oh, I'm going to wear a chest binder too because it's quite fun. That child who has genuine problems is going to get neglected.
No, absolutely. I mean,
it's just nobody wins.
No, absolutely. And schools and teachers, they are encouraging this. They are teaching it. So one of the things that the girl says here, this very brave girl who's written this report, she talks about the school entrance being emblazoned with rainbow flags and labels such as non-binary, polysexual, demi-boy, demi-girl and pansexual. Now, you tell me, why does any 12-year-old need to know what those words mean? They're made up, they're rubbish words. You know, these are not proper categories, as far as I'm concerned, in the real world.
Years ago...
You know, teach them French, teach them German, expand their English vocabulary.
Making them preoccupied with their sexuality at 14 years old. 14 years old, you might have quite fancied the boy in the, you know, the other class or whatever, but you didn't need to label what that was.
No.
You just needed to be allowed to grow up and into yourself without
totally
all of
agree.
this. This legal case is going to be interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, we've got to move on because there's another pandemic coming. The World Health Organization. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I mean, I understand it, but we've had it. They tried it with monkeypox, didn't they? The World Health Organization. Everyone did comedy memes and took the mickey out of it. The World Health Organization says we must prepare for potential human bird flu pandemic as the H5N1 avian strain jumps to mammals. Take it seriously, Jo?
No, not at all. Do you know what I do take seriously, though, that I think is really, really sad and pathetic, is that there is clearly a group of people out there, and I'd put people at the World Health Organization amongst this, who are clearly nostalgic for the days of COVID and lockdown and seem to would love nothing more than to take us right back there. I mean, maybe they miss the power and the control they had over all our lives. Maybe they miss lockdown and not being able to... Maybe they're so sad they miss not being having an excuse to socialise.
I remember there was profits to be made. We created more billionaires during the pandemic than any other time in human history.
We certainly did. I mean, this comes round about every 10 years, the bird flu one.
Does.
I'm a property investor, and about 15 years ago, I got this ridiculous advice, you know, from somebody who's managing my properties that if I were you, I'd get out of the property market. Oh, why? Well, we've read that there's going to be an outbreak of avian flu, bird flu. It's estimated over 1 million people are going to die, and that means there's going to be a lot of spare property on the market. I'd get out now. Not one person died. This is how it happens. These ridiculous, scarist, you know, scaremongering reports come out that, oh, we're all doomed, we'll all die. All this goes on about is, you know, it goes from birds to otters and all this kind of stuff. Yes, but we've got decent enough medicine in this country to contain all that, and there's never been an example of it leaping to a human and killing a human. It's so scaremongering, you know?
Well, the UK Health and Security Agency, as I've said before, the Public Health England morphed mysteriously into the UK Health and Security Agency during the pandemic. They have said the rapid and consistent acquisition of the mutation in mammals may imply this virus has a propensity to cause zoonotic infections. Why do they talk in such scaremongering language?
Exactly. I mean, the fact is, you know, even if that does happen, the fact is we've got the science, the technology, the capacity to deal with it. You know, we can treat people who get sick.
That's
you know,
right.
Hopefully, with if we had a better health service, even better. But this panic, this fear-mongering, it just feeds into this climate that's completely debilitating.
It's absolutely... Do you remember when, just after Tony Blair became Prime Minister, we had the worst outbreak of foot and mouth disease in this country? And I mean, we all mix amongst cows. We all eat meat, you know. We all eat sheep, you know, lamb and all that kind of stuff. Nobody ever suffered from foot and mouth disease, the greatest animal pandemic this country's ever suffered. Why on earth would bird flu attack us?
Now, there's one story that, you know, we talked obviously about Archie Battersby a lot, didn't we? That awful story. Do you remember the little boy?
Shocking.
Holly Downs was his mother, and she says that she's been trolled, actually, since the death of Archie. And the coroner has now concluded that Archie didn't deliberately kill himself. He hadn't intended to harm himself, but had done so inadvertently during a prank or experiment that went wrong after he put his head in a noose or put a cord around his neck. This, hopefully, feels like some closure, Mike, to what was a really awful story.
I'm not sure if it is closure, because also in the report, you'll see that the coroner also said there's no evidence he was trying to copy some online game that kids had been pursuing, you see what I mean? So it's still a total mystery with the rope around your neck. It was never explained at the time, wasn't it? How the rope got around his neck, how far did he fall, and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest, I don't think it's any clearer now. It's obvious that this poor mother was going to be subject to abuse, because that's what happens. I mean, the other case at the moment, the missing lady, you know, in Lancashire.
Nicola Bulley.
Yeah. Her family are now subject to abuse, you know what I mean? It unfortunately happened, so I would ignore the abuse, because that doesn't give you any indication whatsoever of the truth of the matter, and just sympathise with the poor mother and the poor little boy. I mean, he was such a good-looking little kid, wasn't he? You know, with his big eyes and his big teeth, his blonde hair. And it's just a human tragedy made worse by the speculation that's going around it. Although I don't think there's a definitive verdict of how he died, once the coroner has issued his ultimate decision. It's the end of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's what it seems to me, that this was a tragic accident. And I really hope the parents can get some peace now, because, you know, it's the kind of thing you wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy, to lose a child.
I think that happens to children all the time, isn't it? Inexplicable actions.
It's horrible, it's tragic, and obviously compounded by the social media trolling and bullying, and I hope they can switch that off, and I hope they can get some peace.
Let's just mention the Nicola Bulley case, because it feels remiss not to do so at the end of the week, where so much attention has been put on that case. What's your perspective on it, Mike?
Well,
it looks like there's been a lot of mistakes made by the police. It's how it seems from the outside.
I think the police superintendent in charge is a lady called Riley, OK? I think I'm right in saying that, because I've seen her a couple of times on the show.
Yeah.
Look, I don't know anything about policing, but I would say that officer looks completely out of her depth to me in handling a massive legal situation. Can't call it a crime. We don't know if it is a crime yet or not, but it's a massive legal situation she's got a grip of. Now, on this very channel on Sunday morning, I saw that expert who's been there for the last 2 or 3 days with his boat.
The diving.
Exactly, the diving expert. His name's Paul somebody. And for the first time, he said, look, I don't quite get this. If they invited me up there, I could find out in 24 hours whether she's in the river or not. Why wasn't he brought there at the start? Now, I did another TV show this week in which a senior retired officer came onto the screen and I said, excuse me, answer 2 questions, please. Why wasn't the area sealed off the moment that Nicola went missing? Because there could be a footprint in the ground, which might be a third person. Secondly, why wasn't the bench taken away for forensic examination? Because how do you know somebody wasn't sitting on the bench next to her when she put her phone down? And the police officer, the retired police officer, got completely flustered and said, oh, you had to allow people to walk around to look for her in the river. And as for the bench, well, it's irrelevant. I don't think so.
I guess they would say, in their defence, and they aren't here to defend themselves on how they've run the investigation, would be, it wasn't necessarily a crime. It was a mum who was walking a dog and didn't have any reason to think she would have been abducted in that particular area or gone missing. And so we weren't looking at it as a crime. But it feels like in maybe just with hindsight, Joanna, that just seems like a mistake.
I mean, you're right. I think it was treated as a missing persons inquiry, wasn't it?
But you see, that is an investigation.
Yeah.
Missing persons always opens the door to abduction, doesn't it?
No, I mean, it just seems completely baffling, inexplicable. The idea that somebody can just vanish, seemingly just vanish off the face of the earth with no explanation whatsoever. I mean, again, a bit like the poor boy that we've just been talking about. And your heart goes out to the family.
My heart goes out to their family as well, particularly the children.
Absolutely.
But look, we've come to the end of the show. And actually, that's the end of the week for me. Thanks, Mike Parry. Thanks, Joanna Williams.
Pleasure.
Right, I will be back on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Tomorrow morning will be Esther and Phil here on GB News at 10. But coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. Have a great weekend. See you next week.
Hello. It's been a bit of a dull, dreary start across southern parts of the UK, but brighter skies are on their way. Dry for many through the rest of the day, but blustery showers will continue in the far north. Here we're close to an area of low pressure, tightly packed isobars, and a number of showers, rain, sleet, hail and some hill snow. This cold front, meanwhile, has been clearing southwards. Still some cloud associated with it in the far south and southeast